1788, Carlos IV became king. There was tension between France and Spain because he allied with the Directory at England, who were enemies of France. When Louis XVI was executed, it started a war between France and Spain. The French got the advantage over Spaniards, forcing them to sign the Treaty of Basilia in 1795. The Prime Minister, Manuel Godoy, was persuaded by Napoleon in order to invade Portugal. They were allies of Great Britain, the main enemy of Napoleon, so he wanted also to conquer Spain. How a Prime Minister could have done that? Easy. It is said that he was a simple royal ward who gave his love to the Queen. Because of that, he was ascended to Prime Minister by the Queen. Having no idea of what he was doing, he sold his own country. Ferdinand VII wanted the crown from his own father, so he did this. He convinced the Aranjuez Mutiny, a popular rising against Manuel Godoy and his rules, and this led to the abolition of his father. However, something went wrong. Napoleon convinced both father and son to give the crown to his own brother, José Bonaparte or Pepe Botella. Why he was called that? Well, it was said that he was a drunk person and he went with other girls, but in the end, it wasn't true. The Napoleonic Army in Spain provoked the revolution in Madrid on 2 May 1808. This started the War of Independence. The forces who were against Napoleon were organized in juntas provinciales, who were coordinated by the Junta Suprema Central. This created a new government of opposition. There were three main different ideological groups during this war. As first, the Los Afrancesados, Spanish people who actually support the reign of José Bonaparte. Then we have Los Absolutistas, who supported the return of Ferdinand VII without making any type of political reforms, so they supported the conservation of the unregented regime. And Los Liberales, who wanted a new type of regime based on Enlightenment ideas and the establishment of a constitution with its rules. War campaigns. The Spanish people use a method called guerrillas, which consists on 1. Hide and wait, 2. Ambush them, and 3. Run the hell out of there. This made Napoleon lose Spain, so it was an effective method. There were high tension and many rebellions on cities against the French army. Some coalition of cities fought and won at the Battle of Bailén in 1808. This even made Napoleon to bring even more troops to Spain, achieving control over it, and made the people in towns get mad. The Junta Suprema, located in Cádiz, in 1809, signed an alliance with England. This was a key treaty because in 1812 the Allied forces won at the Battle of Los Arapiles. This and the successive failures of Napoleon in Europe and his met at the war campaign in Russia, plus the pain that the Spanish people made feel to Napoleon because of their garbage method, made him to lose the control of the peninsula, and his brother José Bonaparte fled from Spain. Finally, Napoleon lost Spain after almost 6 years of campaign, and Ferdinand returned to the throne and imposed an absolutist monarchy in March of 1814. Las Cortes de Cádiz. Delegates meet in Cádiz in 1810, although not everyone was liberal. They tried to establish equality among the social statements. A new constitution of 1812 that abolished the ancient regime and the feudal privileges who were unfair. But mostly it said the equality between all the Spanish people before the laws. But something went wrong. A group lied to the king, saying that everyone wanted an absolutism monarchy. The king also wanted, so it was perfect for him. So he wrote a treaty of 4th May in Valencia and ordered the detention of numerous groups of liberal people and afrancesado. Many people was exiled from Spain, and one of them was José de Espronceda, one of the best writers of all time.
This period is divided in 3 parts that change from absolutism to liberalism. In the first one, the absolutist period, the king Fernando VII took several measures, such as the dissolution of the Cortes and the abolishment of its law, prosecution of the liberalists, the establishment of the Inquisition and the guild's rights and feudal's privilege, and the return of the disentangled land from the church and the nobles. The next one, the liberal tertium, Rafael Riego established the constitution and the achievements of the Cortes. There was an internal conflict between the Moderada and the Exaltada factions. At the end, Fernando VII gained support of the Holy Alliance formed by the absolutist regimes in Europe. The Cien Mil Hijos de San Luis entered Spain in 1823 and re-established absolutism. The next period, the ominous decade, was marked by a problem of suppression and a brutal repression of the liberals, many of whom fled to other countries. Fernando had 2 children, but the Salic law told that only males could inherit the throne. Fernando abolished this law because he wanted his daughter Isabel to be his heir. Don Carlos, his brother, went behind his back and asked the absolutists, who were called Carlistas, for help because he was against it. In Fernando's last years, most of the American colonies achieved independence, process led by the descendant of Spanish colonists, called criollos. The reasons why they got independence were the high taxes, the lack of representation in Spain, social marginalization, the liberal ideas that they got from the French Revolution and the independence of the United States, and the help they got from Britain. The war is divided in several stages. The first one, from 1810 to 1814, coincided with the Spanish War of Independence. Revolutionary juntas were established and expressed the desire for independence. Second one, from 1815 to 1825, Fernando VII had recovered the crown and refused to give independence to the colony. Under the leadership of Sucre, Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín, and with the help of Britain, they managed to fight against Spain. They gained military victories, and at the end they got independence. Spain lost all its American territories except for Cuba and Puerto Rico.
Going to talk about the reign of Queen Isabel and the Glorious Revolution. First, we have the Isabelline period, which consists of 3 stages. The first one, called the Regency period, from 1833 till 1843. Then the reign of Isabel II, from 1843 till 1869. And the third stage is called the Revolutionary period, from 1869 till 1874. The Regency period, the first period, as I said before, goes from 1833 till 1843. So when Ferdinand died, Isabel was only 3 years old. So the government was exercised by the regent. As Isabel was too young to be the queen, her first mother, Maria Cristina, became the queen, and then later the General Espartero. This was a period of civil war. The absolutists, also called Carlists, versus the liberals. The absolutists supporting Don Carlos and the liberals supporting Isabel. And at the end, the liberals won in a battle called Embrance of Bergara. Then we have the reign of Isabel II, that goes from 1843 till 1868. So Isabel was declared an adult at the age of 13 and succeeded to the throne. During her reign, 2 liberal parties, the Modern Party and the Progressive Party, confronted due to one of imposing principles, and later on emerged new parties, Democrats and Republicans and the Union Liberal. And they signed the Pacto de Ostende, in which states the deposition of Isabel and the formation of a constitution voted through the parliament. Then we have the final period, the Revolutionary period, that goes from 1869 till 1874, and it also known as Sexenio Revolucionario, and it all began with the exilium of Isabel II. We have so the first stage is called the Provisional Government, that states the Constitution of 1869 that recognizes a number of rights for the first time in history in Spain. Then we have the second stage, that is called the Democratic Monarchy, that goes from 1871 till 1873. Amadeo of Savoy was elected new king of Spain through parliament, although his reign was brief due to the opposition of many groups, and he abdicated in 1873, and this is the reason why this period is so short. And lastly, we have the third stage, that is called the First Republic, and goes from 1873 to 1874. And this was also a brief period due to the disputes and wars in Spanish territory. As the monarchy was reestablished, Alfonso XII, the son of Queen Isabel, was brought to the throne. we're going to talk about agriculture, industry, and development. First, we have developments in agriculture and land confiscations. The confiscation of land, also known as desamortización, was a process that consists in taking the land away from the church and other municipalities and sent them from profit so the land could be used for agricultural businesses. The most important law was Mendizábal. The outcome of this law weren't as expected. Most of the land was bought by wealthy people that imposed harder working conditions, and also town councils became poorer with selling of common lands. But improvements were made, such as new machinery and the increasement of cultivated areas. Secondly, we're going to talk about developments in industry. The Industrial Revolution had a small impact in Spain due to desamortización. Wealthy people invested mostly in agriculture. Much of the population was poor and middle class was almost inexistent, so there wasn't a high demand of goods. Finally, the sectors that grew the most were the mining industry, textile industry, and steel and iron industry.
We find 4 different groups. The upper class lost its privileges but kept their manners, enlarged their properties, and maintained their political and social influence. The upper bourgeoisie obtained its wealth mainly from commerce and finance. They also tried to become nobles by marrying other nobles and buying lands. The middle class was formed by landowners, liberal professions, and craftsmen and merchants. The lower class, the last one, was formed by jornaleros and arrendatarios in rural areas. The asalariados were the laborers, and there was also a group that was growing of industrial workers. It started with spontaneous riots and the destruction of industrial machinery. The laborers weren't feeling satisfied in their works and they were treated poorly. The Sexenio Revolucionario recognized freedom of association and meeting, and associations that demanded improvements in wages and working conditions contacted the First International. In 1870, the Federación Obrera Regional Española was created due to anarchist ideas. Socialist ideas also widespread.
In 1875, the restoration took place. The Bourbons returned to the throne in the figure of Alfonso XII, the son of Isabel II. The conservative politician Cánovas del Castillo convinced Isabel II to abdicate in favor of her son Alfonso, and intervention was supported by the middle class and the army. Became king, Prince Alfonso had to sign the Sanskar document in which he promised to maintain a constitutional government. Shortly after, there was a military pronunciamiento by General Martínez Campos that proclaimed Alfonso king of Spain. Alfonso XII died in 1885, before his legitimate son Alfonso was born. His widow, Queen Maria Cristina, was regent until Alfonso XIII was 16 and succeeded to the throne. This period is known as the Restoration period, and it took 17 years. The political system was based on 2 pillars, the Constitution of 1876 and the alternation of parties in government. there was a pacific alternation of power between the two main political parties, the Conservative Party and the Liberalist Party, that they were similar like PP and PSOE of nowadays. The Conservative Party was led by Cánovas del Castillo and was a new version of the Moderate Party, and the Liberal Party was led by Sagasta and was a new version of the All Progressive Party. The Constitution of 1817 was conservative, but it was possible for different parties to govern without the need to change it. The Constitution divided the power of the country into three ones: the legislative power, the executive power, and the judicial power. Each one has its own way of work. The legislative power had the parliament. The executive had the king, and the judicial had the court of justice. The king could convince, suspend, and dissolve the parliament. The parliament was divided into two important buildings, the Congress and the Senate. The Congress contains the deputies that they were chosen by the electors, and in the Senate we have the senators that they were chosen by the corporations and major contributions. In the executive power, the king appoints and dismisses the government, and the government appoints to the Senate that they will control the senators.
And now we're going to talk about Restoration too. There were some regional and nationalist movements caused by the political parties. For example, the Republicans were excluded. It was divided into several groups, in which PSOE was inside, founded in 1879 by Pablo Iglesias. Workers' movement gained strength after the Constitution of 1876. Regionalism and nationalism originated a reaction against the Restoration, which provoked riots, and in Catalonia, the Catalan was declared as major language in 1892.
And now we're going to talk about the 1898 disaster. There were three principal countries, Cuba and USA, that were allies, and there was Spain that was against them. Cuba demanded a central government and USA support them, but Spain was against them. They didn't want a central government because it was against what they wanted. So this provoked the Spanish-American War that was fought in Philippines, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. Spain was defeated quickly and had to cede all the countries at the Treaty of Paris 1898. Meanwhile, in Spain, the Regeneracionismo was an intellectual movement that wanted to end with the corruption in the country. Population grew from 16 million people to 24 million people during the reign of this king, Alfonso XIII. We can see in this photo that is a peak of population, one of the biggest peaks in history of Spain. The principal cities were Madrid and Barcelona, same as nowadays where most of the people was living. As Madrid and Barcelona were the main cities of our country, they were also the first one to have the first industries and factories in all the country. Meanwhile, like for example in Andalusia, they were based in agriculture that was the main source of economy. But the society was still unequal, like in the Middle Ages.
Between 1982 and 1970, the system alternated between Conservative and Liberalist Party, with its own leaders Antonio Maura of the Conservative Party and José Canalejas, the leader of the Liberal Party. During this period, there was a war with Morocco, and it was the main issue. The northern territory was a protectorate of Spain, but the inhabitants of the reef were in constant rebellions because of the invasion. In 1909, the recruitment of Catalan reserve troops for the war provoked riots in Barcelona, and they were severely suppressed by the army. The bloody confrontations were known as the Tragic Week. After this, the pact of alternation between parties was broken. In 1917, the situation deteriorated into a crisis. The crisis was provoked by the army, which demanded higher pay. With this, the Catalan nationalists, who called for a decentralized state with autonomies, and the left-wing parties and unions, which organized a general strike to protest against the miserable conditions of the working class. Between 1999 and 1923, the situation got worse. The economic crisis after the end of the First World War and the influence of the Russian Revolution provoked continuous uprising. At the end, with the Battle of Anahuac that caused 10,000 deaths, the government lost power and became very weak, including the king. And finally, General Primo de Rivera organized a coup d'etat on the 13th of December 1993 and imposed a dictatorship in Spain.
And now we are going to talk about Primo de Rivera and his dictatorship. He imposed a military government, and so he suspended the constitution and banned all the political parties so he could have all the power. He also defeated the Moroccans in 1925, and we had Ceuta and Melilla. He organized a new government with civilian politicians. The economic crisis led to the unemployment of the country, and he felt forced to resign in 1930. After this, people felt relieved that he renounced to power, and also a poet showed his annoyance against him with a poem he composed with him. But if we focus in the first letter of each verse, there is a secret message that says Primo de Rivera borracho, that means he was a drunk person. After Primo de Rivera left the nation, the Republican Party triumphed in almost all around the country, and Alfonso XIII had no alternative to go out of the country. At this moment was proclaimed the Second Republic on the 14th April 1931.